Excellent. All right, well, welcome everybody. If you haven't already done so, it looks like most of you have. Remember to rename yourself for our breakouts today. We're going to have a couple of breakouts. We want to make sure you're in the groups where you're going to get the information that is best for you. If you can go to the next slide. Yeah, so today, this is a great day. I think this one informs a lot of your strategy, a lot of how you'll talk about some of the decisions you make, and a bit about how you talk about your intellectual property and protective strategies, which is always a big question for investors. So we're going to start today with Tim Jones from Inisphere, and he's going to go over business model assumptions. We're going to take a 25 minutes to do a quick exercise to make sure that that made sense to everybody, and a chance for a few people to kind of share their thoughts on where they would fit in the strategy compass. We're then going to have Wilson Sonsini join us for most of the rest of the day. We're going to have Bill Barnett going to give us an overview of perspectives on IP and protective strategies. We'll take a break. And then we'll do a deeper dive aligned by some of our fields of focus. So the biopharm group, your number will be 101, the digital and software will be 202, and then the devices, diagnostics, and advanced materials 303. And we kind of put you in that chart that we had up front. Bill will group us back together just to see if there's some final thoughts and questions we might have. We'll go over the deliverables and homework that we want you to do after today, and then wrap up. And so that's our agenda for today. If we can go to the next slide. So again, just the Zoom conference. Please use your mute feature when you're listening. Come off mute to ask a question or put it in the chat box, and we'll be watching that if anyone has a question. The presenters will pause and take questions, monitor the chat window. If you can keep your video on, that would be best for the presenters. If you are having issues or freeze frames or whatever, try shutting off your email or shutting off your camera to see if that helps with your bandwidth. All right, next slide. All right, I think it's over to Tim.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. Good morning, all. I am going to share my screen here. And I think the order of the day is that we'll go through the background here, the framework, and then you have an opportunity to actually demonstrate your knowledge here in an exercise. So hoping that this morning will go a little better than the Nuggets Timberwolves game last night. But let's go ahead and get started here. So, certainly as I think about the basis behind this life sciences cohort, right, there's a lot of very innovative technology that's going on. One of the other, aspects here, right, is innovation in business models. And so, I think about Dell a number of years ago, right? They really had an innovative business model at that point in time. And so as we go through the conversation, the exercise today, I would certainly encourage you to be thinking about, right, innovations in the business area. And then I would also toss out that I think Mike Freeman went over this diamond and square framework in day one. And, the square was around founders, partners, investors, and team. And I think in the diamond, right, was really around customer value, operations, marketing, and then ultimately a profit. And so in my mind, right, the next 30 minutes or so we're going to spend together is really around thinking about a framework to get into a business model that will, as you increase revenue, you're going to, lower costs at the unit level, as well as, maintaining tight hold on your fixed costs. And I'm going to come at this, from an investor standpoint, because I see quite a few of these as we make investments and as I work with portfolio companies. And so, before we get started, I will toss out another piece here is that, One of the previous jobs that I had was with a Fortune 500 company, and even my last position there, we were innovating around business models in a semi-regulated industry, and so even if you're thinking now, hey, wait a second, I'm never going to have a business model. I'm going to sell before I or maybe right after I get after FDA regulations, and I'm not going to have any customers, things like that. I would encourage you to think about maybe how your business would fit into, an acquirer's business, right? And so, what's the business model there that would make sense? And so, how do you position yourself to be successful? So that's kind of a long introduction to what we're talking about today. But the idea is to really introduce a framework here, right? And so as you think about your particular technology and how you're going to organize your business, right, is really to uh, drive the strategic direction, right? And so when I do an evaluation of early stage companies, I look at the entirety of the business, technology, the founders, what the business model is, what's their go-to-market strategies, how that all comes together, and then also, the financials of the organization. Are they forecasting the financials that aligns with what this particular strategy looks like? Are you thinking about, right, where you need to hire the right folks? And to really to enter into this conversation, right, there's a framework that we're going to introduce today that certainly there are trade-offs that you're going to have to evaluate and then make decisions on. But once you've made those decisions, then you can move forward, I think, and have a pretty robust conversation with not only the team, but also any sort of external folks. Whether you think about strategic partners, whether you think about investors, folks like that. So hopefully it'll add a little bit more clarity on the direction of the business as you move forward. So what we have found is that hey, there's especially a particular passion for a lot of technical founders around technology, maybe not as much around the business aspect, and so maybe there's a default kind of business model in mind that folks would say, hey, this is going to be my path. And oh, by the way, I've got a lot of other work to be doing, so I'm gonna follow this well-trodden path here. And so, can y'all go on mute, please? I'm getting some feedback. Thank you. And so, in the interest of time and maybe making decisions about where to focus, the business model and really thinking about that kind of falls down the totem pole, right? As well as there's a lot of different ways folks can go to market. There's a lot of decisions around building your business to be successful. And so, at some point in time, maybe there's a feeling of being overwhelmed and boy, I just want to make a decision and that's it, and then let's move forward. When you go out to even search on business models, I mean, holy smokes, there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of different evaluation tools that will touch on a variety of different things inside your business to say, yeah, you have a good business model or a bad business model. Today, we are really here to have a conversation around a specific framework that tries to boil this down into a couple of different questions, maybe 4 quadrants then, and really help evaluate, what your strategy could be. It's really, to help cut through the kind of the fog of uncertainty, right, around exploring, additional business models versus, going to market with the first realistic strategy. And so Harvard Business Review, they proposed this a number of years ago in strategy for startups. And so, the idea being that, they looked at hundreds of different startups, what was successful, what wasn't successful, and really boiled it down to, a couple of different questions that you have to answer. And so that's kind of the lead in for today, right? We're going to be looking at 2 different questions that you should answer, right? And then lays out into into a quadrant that effectively, I want to call it, defines your strategy, but at least helps clarify what direction you're going to go and maybe what you're going to lean on here. And again, this is an HBR strategy for startups type of framework and approach that we thought was particularly successful. So I would tell you also that as we go into this conversation here, I've been involved in a couple of medical device startups over the past couple of years, and they have shifted their approach, where they had started strictly around going an FDA approval process, bringing their device to market subsequent to that, et cetera, et cetera. And more recently, both companies have decided to try to commercialize a product prior to that FDA approval, in a slightly different market, et cetera. And so, again, as we talk through today, this is not meant to be a static discussion. This is meant to, help you evaluate not only at this point in time, but then also as you move forward, hey, maybe there's an opportunity here to think about this. So the first question, right, is really around how are you going to enter the market and who's in the market already, right? And so you really have two choices, right? You can either collaborate with folks that are in the market, or you can compete with folks in the market. We made an investment here in the fund within the past year. And I don't know if you all know Splunk, but they had a big announcement about 6 months ago, but certainly they are an 800-pound gorilla in the cybersecurity market. We invested in a company, and their strategy is directly compete with Splunk, which is interesting, right? Going after somebody that size with a particular technology and a business plan to do that. On the other hand, right, we have made an investment in a company in the wastewater space, and they initially took the approach to actually collaborate with one of these 800-pound gorillas in the marketplace, right, as a pathway to market. And so that particular collaboration actually fell apart. And so let's talk a little bit about, hey, what are the benefits behind collaboration? What's the benefits behind competing in the market space? So we'll start with collaborate here as a startup, right? Collaborating with somebody that's already established there in the marketplace, that may give you the ability to gain access to customers, maybe to supply chains, other resources that are out there, right? But it may come with a bureaucratic price. And as I mentioned, that wastewater company, that's exactly what they ran into, right? They had this much larger player that they were trying to collaborate with, but it didn't work out. Larger company had much more, bargaining power, and the speed at which the smaller company was trying to move did not match the speed at which the larger company was able to move. So unfortunately, that collaboration didn't work. If you go the path of competing, right, that may allow you as a startup to move fast. You may be able to build your business on potentially overlooked customers that are out there. You're going to need to bring a whole lot of innovation, but it would likely mean that you're going to need to deploy greater financial and other types of resources potentially, right? If you don't have those collaborators that are already in the game and able to help you in that sense. So that's the one question. That's the first question we need to be thinking about. How are we going to approach the market with the incumbents that are already there? The second question is around innovation and your innovation, and how do we really work with that in the marketplace, right? You can either do what's called build a moat, or you can storm a hill, right? So when you're thinking about building a moat, it's really around intellectual property that gives your startup more control and prevent that direct competition, right? So that way you can achieve greater bargaining power, both with supply chain partners, customers, et cetera. As you go about doing that and building up your IP moat, you just have to understand, right, then your transaction costs typically with all of these partners that we're thinking about, uh, are going to be greater than, potentially storming the hill. So if you're going to be storming the hill, right, that's all about, speed and, quickly getting to market with a commercial product, being able to experiment and iterate in the market, right? That's, a characteristic of that one. This would typically result in very, open to competition, right? And you're going to need to react to those competitive forces when they arise. And if I was to think about this maybe in the life sciences space, I would probably build a moat. I would think about medical devices strategy, maybe traveling that path, traditionally. Storming the hill, maybe that's much more of a digital health type of path. But that again, I mentioned before that I'm with two medical device companies that certainly they're trying to build the IP, go the FDA route, but at the same time, they have identified and uncovered commercial opportunities where I think they're really trying to bring to market a little bit faster some of their technology. So they're continuing to evaluate. Now, when you put the two together on an XY axis here, right, and you establish the quadrants, then you can kind of bucketize, right, within the framework, the type of strategy that maybe you're thinking about here. And so we'll go through each one of these, but this I think is helpful for folks, right, to then say, okay, what are the characteristics of each one of these different quadrants? How do I best fit into maybe one of these? I certainly should evaluate all four of them. But at least, it gives you an idea of then, hey, what path makes a lot of sense for me? And then you're able to communicate that to, the team, investors, partners, etc. So let's dig into each one of these quadrants here. And I will reiterate that the idea behind the exercise after this conversation is to actually think about your company. So, as we go through these, I would definitely encourage you to be thinking about how does this apply to your particular, organization, and how do you going to think about this. So I would suggest we start in the upper left-hand corner here around the intellectual property strategy. Okay. And this is where you have an organization that is, really focused on your intellectual property, right? And then you're probably using collaborators to maybe take on the customer interactions, right? You're likely to need patents, trademarks, right, to preserve your bargaining power. You're going to need to find suitable partners that will be able to take this to market alongside you. Those of you that are audiophiles will understand that, hey, Dolby, I think, is a great example of a company in this space, right, where they have had the underlying technology, but you don't go off and buy Dolby. You go off and listen, right, to all of these other organizations or products, right, that actually use the underlying technology. You can think about maybe Intel, right, Intel Inside, right. You don't go off. You could buy Intel chips. I agree, but in most cases, you're buying a computer that's put together using Intel in the back end. But again, the idea is that, hey, that is where you become, specialized. That's where you work, and you're really around driving that intellectual property and not necessarily, owning that customer, right, and those customer interactions. So let's move down to the lower right, and in that quadrant, it's called disruption, right, and this is where a startup would compete directly with the incumbents that are out there, right? And you're going to go off and commercialize as soon as possible. You're going to own your own products and services. You're going to build out the solution. You're going to build out the channels to market. So whether it's a direct sales force, right, or whatever that happens to be, you're going to own all of that. And the idea is that you're bringing to market your products and services before the customers can respond to that. Okay, you're going to build your customer loyalty. you're going to have the resources to scale quickly when it's appropriate. You're less concerned about that IP in this particular situation, right? And you're not going to be collaborating with folks. You're just going to market and you're just doing it. Um, I think that a great example here would be Netflix, for instance. They were very innovative. They shifted from mailing out DVDs years ago to online, et cetera. But they disrupted that market that was really held by Blockbuster at the time. So that's a path to market. And just so we all understand here, I'm trying to give examples across a broad variety of industries here, just to one, maybe you're familiar with them, but then two, I think it's also valuable to understand, hey, how did other industries think about this too, and then you can try to apply it to maybe where you're at. Moving to the lower left quadrant, value chain, right? And this is really around focusing on commercialization and being tactically better than other folks that are out there. You become a preferred partner, right? Because of your ability to deliver. You could focus on maybe a single horizontal in the entire value chain, and you want to deliver that unparalleled expertise, right, and excellence here. You're really focused on delivering what is necessary to be successful, right, for your partners as you collaborate with them, as they take that product or service to market. I think about one here that is pretty significant, and it's a company called Foxconn, and they're in the Apple iPhone supply chain, right? And they're pretty critical to the success of Apple's iPhone. But you don't necessarily know, and you don't go buy Foxconn, right? You buy the Apple iPhone. But without them, then Apple would not be able to deliver. And then the final quadrant is the architectural strategy, and this is where you have you're competing in the marketplace, and you control your IP, right? And let's argue you're kind of in the probably the most difficult box or difficult quadrant to be in, right? Because you're really developing an entirely new value chain, right? And you're really controlling the significant pieces of it. It's a strategy that once you head down this path is pretty difficult to pivot away from, because you're effectively building platforms and not products. Some of the biggest names in the industry, when you think about, for instance, Facebook, right? That's out there is a great example of somebody that's in there. But it's a lot of effort, and you're just thinking about things differently. And, if you're going to grow that entire ecosystem, the value chain, then that's fantastic. It's just very difficult to, shoot and miss, let's call it, in that one, still be relatively successful. So how do I think about, or how do I work with companies as they go through and actually use this tool then, right? I mean, it's pretty simple, 2 ideas, and you're looking at 4 quadrants here. And so the idea is to be able to use this strategic compass, right, and the 4 go-to-market strategies, and really fill out each one of these with potential options, right? So as you think about your business, right, hey, you may fit into all 4 of these quadrants in some fashion, and I would encourage you to evaluate all 4 of these quadrants, and you want to be evaluating them with, hey, what's the capital commitment out there, right? What's your momentum in any particular area? Thinking about who your customers are, right? What sort of technology you're focused on, what's the competition, and so I think that some of the boxes typically will fall out and say, yep, that makes sense, or that one doesn't make sense. And will give you a much better idea of which, path to follow. The flip side is, a little bit of a cautionary tale to say, boy, if you don't have a couple of pretty good options to pursue based on this exercise, um, you might want to reevaluate the quite frankly the company, the business, and really be thinking about, okay, are there ways to open up more of these quadrants to be successful. um, so as you go through that, certainly you want to be, land on one of them, but I think you want to have a couple of options, especially, right, as you think about, even the examples I gave with the medical device companies earlier, where they're pivoting based on what they're hearing from the market. So, if you're locked into one quadrant and, 2 years from now, you're thinking about pivoting and there's no, pivots that are available to you, then it becomes a little bit more of a challenge for you to still remain successful in what you're doing. So in my mind, right, this is how you use the strategy compass, and I think the exercise you're going to go through today, hopefully you'll be doing that. And so I'm going to finish here before you jump actually into the exercise, just to understand that, right, your business model is all about choices. I talk to, my kids, right? It's about making choices now. They're at a stage in life where they can't do everything. And so you need to make choices. And this is very similar here. You need to make the choices and what's going to drive, the customer value proposition and really drive profits. So I think I asked you a little bit here earlier to think about the diamond and square framework. And so as you put together the business model, right, you need to be thinking about all of these different areas and, who's your target customer? How are you going to make money? How are you going to market to them? What's your cost structure? What's your pricing structure, et cetera? But I think that all fits in then well to that previous conversation around your diamond and square. So I will leave you here with a couple of final questions. For you, I would take a couple of questions before we jump into the exercise, but I think that that's the next step, is to actually then take this framework and then apply that to your particular business. So I'll pause. I don't see any raised hands or questions in the chat box or anything else. Oh, I think maybe I have one here. Oh, hold on. 101 Biopharma. I guess I don't have your full name. I apologize.
David.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, David, go ahead.
Oh, I was actually clapping.
Oh,
I, well, I mean, I guess I could always ask about like vertical and horizontal integrations as far as the competitive versus architectural strategy. Because that's the way that I was thinking, developing an initial model, an IP strategy, and then going to scale would probably require more architectural strategy, and those are far separated as far as
yeah.
the funding is concerned. I mean, unless there's other questions, do you want to go into some of that?
Yeah. I think that certainly, being able to pivot is helpful. And, I don't necessarily know your business at all. So speaking generically, is that possible? Yes. Is it somewhat confusing to partners and investors and folks like that? It could be. And so I would encourage you to think about, okay, hey, maybe I have a shorter term strategy, that includes this quadrant, and then 10 years down the road, I'm going to be shifting over here, which is fine. But it's a conversation that I think you need to be really careful of whenever you're having that with your partners. And I would also say that When I was with, this Fortune 500 company, we had a business model. We've been in business for whatever, 120 years. And the particular market I was in, which was energy at the time, was semi-regulated. And we were bringing to model a very new business model. Um, and the idea was that we had a pretty good understanding of the landscape. We knew the customers, we knew technologies, we had a really good idea. And so, I think that sitting in the seat you're in now, and then maybe, you talked a little about maybe shifting to an architectural strategy in the future, that, can be done. It would probably be better informed whenever you're down the path a little bit, because that's exactly, I would argue, a little bit of the strategy that we were trying to get into. And it wasn't our sweet spot in the marketplace, but it was really closely aligned with it. And so that was a path that we were following, and we had a lot of resources available to do that. So, in that particular case, you can make an argument that says, hey, that made sense at that point in time to do that evaluation. So anyways, there you go. That's kind of how I thought about it. I don't know, Brian?
Tim, thanks again for the presentation. Awesome perspective. Just a quick question regarding the quadrants. I'm assuming that they're not necessarily mutually exclusive, or is it basically kind of like this is kind of it depends on the timeline and stage. And I think you kind of alluded to that as well too, but is it essentially a tool to kind of help us focus our efforts at a particular time when we're trying to go to market initially? Just some thoughts on that, please.
Yeah, Brian. I mean, I'm a simple guy, right? And I like to try to bucketize everything, and I think we as humans try to do that. But you're 100% correct, right? I mean, there is no doubt that there's overlap between each of these different buckets. So being completely honest, yeah, we're going to try to put you in a bucket here, right? But ultimately, yeah, you could argue that, well, gosh, there really is an overlap between value chain and disruption. And maybe I have two different product lines, right, that's going to go one path or the other. And I would argue that these two medical device startups that I've mentioned previously, their FDA path is probably one of the quadrants. Their go-to-market with the early stage commercial product is going to be a different one. So yes, there is overlap, and then yes, you need to be thinking about how does this apply at this particular point, maybe at this particular product line as you think about it too. Kevin. Kevin James.
There. Nope.
I'm not hearing you, Kevin. Is anybody else able to hear him?
No, I could, his questions are in chat, so I'll read them out loud.
Oh, okay.
I've heard about the blue ocean strategy. Where does this fit in? Is this the intellectual property corner? And a second question, most of us here have intellectual property. Are we all in the top left box? When would you consider being in the top right box?
Yeah, so I'm gonna address the second one first, and then go to the to more of the first one. So first of all, I don't think you're all medical devices. So I think there is some digital health. I think there actually is, a play across some of these boxes based on, certainly who would naturally fit. Again, I don't want to sit here and presuppose that hey, just because you're a medical device, boom, you're intellectual property. That may or may not be true. I don't know. I'm gonna again go back to the conversation I had with two medical device startups here over the past couple of years, where they're really working in two different quadrants now. I would tell you that back in my days, again at this Fortune 500 company, we purchased a company that had gone to market and was a $750 million company that had 0 patents on their technology. So, you could argue that, hey, wait a second, it was all trade secret covered, blah, blah, blah. But ultimately, they knew their customer, and that's how they approached it. And so, in my mind, where they really were was down in the disruption category. So, here, if a medical device you're going through FDA clearance, likely to be patented, the whole thing, you're probably, I would agree, most likely, in the intellectual property quadrant, but I wouldn't, again, want to presuppose that. And you can see here, right, we talk about medical device diagnostics that are up there. So that one. Now, I think your first question around blue ocean strategy, what I guess I would answer the question and not necessarily be extremely direct around this is that there are a variety of different ways to think about your business model, your go-to-market strategies, and how you're going to position your company. Whether it's this strategy compass, whether it's a blue ocean type of process, there are other, hey, your business canvas, right? I mean, there are other things out there that help you think about this. And so, instead of maybe trying to compare and contrast, we think that this is a really good one just because it tries to boil down all the different questions that are out there into two that helps to help really, I guess, directionally focus folks as they begin their journey. So yeah, there you go. Trying to be a lawyer here, and I'm not. There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
All right, awesome. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yep.
All right, I think we're ready to jump into our exercises. Our exercise, I should say. So Suha, can you bring up my
Yeah, sounds good.
All right.
One sec, let me get this.
There we go. All right, so we're going to jump into an exercise. We're going to take about 25 minutes for this exercise. And so we're going to break out into the groups along our same field of focus lines that we're using for the later IP breakouts. And what we'll do is in the breakouts, we'll have 4 or 5 companies volunteers to share their initial thoughts on which quadrant of the strategy compass they think best fits their company and why. And then allow about 5 minutes to have a discussion on any areas that we find that there are differences. So you jump to the next slide. These are going to be our breakouts. And I think Ravi or Suhas, you're good to send us off.
Yep, I will send you off now. Tim, did you want to be in one of the breakout rooms?
Sorry, Robbie. No, I don't have to be in any of the breakout rooms.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Ravi, can you put me in the biopharma room 101?
Hey, let me go check where he's at. Looks like
I put the wrong number on my thing, so I got put in the wrong room.
Okay. All right, Dan, give me a second. Let me go track down Robbie and see if he can do that.
Okay.
Yep, I can do it.
Okay. Thanks, Robbie.
And sorry, which room,
101.
101? Okay.
Robbie, is it working?
I think so.
Okay. Oh, there he goes. Nice. I remember having some problems with it when I tried to do it last time.
It can be tricky.
Let's see. William Barrett? Do you need to be in a breakout room or?
No, I'm just jumping on for the next session. The IP session.
Oh, nice, nice. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, that'll be in 25 minutes or so, I think.
that's okay. I'll just keep you guys in the background and be ready to
Sounds
jump.
good.
Cool, thank you.
Mhm.
have, there we go. To have Bill join us today. Bill is with Wilson Sonsini, and he and some of his colleagues are going to be running the next sections of the workshop today. We're very appreciative of them taking their time to kind of check in with us, develop a curriculum that we can take a look at. And so Bill's going to give us kind of an overview with everybody in the room on perspectives on patents. And then we're going to take a break after Bill's done. And then we're going to check back into our breakouts down our field of focus verticals of biopharm, digital and software, devices, diagnostics, and advanced materials, and get a little more specific focus on how those areas differ a bit. So with that, I will turn it over to Bill.
Thanks, Kevin. So I'm happy to be here with everybody today talking about patents and IP. As I talk about patents from a high level to start with, kind of an intuitive way to think about patents and IP without a whole lot of legalese and law citations and that kind of thing. So hopefully it'll be helpful. And then during the breakout sessions, we'll get into some more details that are more specific around different areas. Julia Minetti's going to talk about biopharma and pharma, where patents are king, and there are a lot of really specific rules and strategies to use there. And then Dalton Case is going to talk about software, which has its own issues and challenges with regard to protection. And then I'll be talking about everything else. So before I get started on that, just tell you a little bit about our life sciences team. We have 250 plus attorneys, patent agents, and FDA specialists around the globe. Lots of life sciences clients. We do lots of funding deals, venture rounds, capital markets deals, and those kinds of things. Around 850 patents granted per year, typically, and lots of collaboration. So we're here to help if you guys need those kind of things. These are just a few of the companies that we've worked with over the years, lots of famous companies. We helped to start many of these companies, including Illumina, Genentech, and PacBio, a number of others that you find familiar. I personally, my background is I've mostly been in-house during my career. I've been in 3 different startups. The one here, I don't know if you can see my mouse, Nobex, my first startup, raised $80 million and then filed for bankruptcy. So that wasn't a very fun experience, but I did learn a lot. The next one, Advanced Liquid Logic, spin out from Duke University in North Carolina. We bootstrapped it with grants and a little bit of seed financing, and we're able to sell that for $100 million. So that was a nice success. And then the last one was Grail, liquid biopsy company, screening for cancer. And we were able to build that one in a few years and sell it for $8 billion. So I'm on a good trajectory, I think. Or maybe there'll be a regression towards the mean. We'll see. So today I'm going to talk about perspectives on patents. And so over the years as a patent attorney, I've been practicing about 30 years, I've found that there are lots of different people have different perspectives. And so I'm going to try to hit on some of these perspectives today. So, we've got the founder perspective, the investor perspective, the competitor perspective, lots of different ways of looking at patents. And I will focus on patents. In the breakout session, we can get into some of the other types of intellectual property that you might be interested in. So just at a high level, what is intellectual property? So it basically refers to creations of the mind, anything that you create with your mind, inventions, literary and artistic works, designs, symbols, names, images used in commerce. So examples are patents, obviously, trademarks, trade secrets, and copyrights. So focusing in on patents, what can be patented? This is the statute, one of the few statutes I'll quote for you today. The statute says patents may be granted for any new and useful process, machine, manufacture, or composition of matter. And then the courts have come in and bungled that up with a bunch of judicially created exceptions to that and said you can't patent abstract ideas, laws of nature, natural phenomena, and those kinds of judicially created exceptions cause a lot of challenges in some areas, such as software, and diagnostics, and we'll get into that a little bit. So I'm going to jump right to the most important part of the patent. A lot of people, when you pick up a patent, it's like, okay, where do I go first? You know, it's kind of an odd document. And patent attorneys, we always go right to the end, to the patent claims, because that's what tells you what the patent actually covers. So this is an example of a patent, an Amgen patent for a monoclonal antibody. You see this claim up there. It's got specific binding properties and whatnot. This patent was ruled invalid by the Supreme Court after millions and millions of dollars worth of litigation. But the patent claims are the key part of the patent. And we'll focus a lot on understanding patent claims and how they work today. So here's an example of a really simple patent claim, a game controller comprising elements A, B, and C. And I just use that for shorthand for any kind of elements. It could be different kinds of switches or electrical circuits or whatever, just as an easy way to think about a patent. When I think about a patent claim, I think about a set, like when you're in elementary school and they're, you know, teaching you about set theory, and you're like the set of everything that has A in it, right? Or the set of everything that intersects with the A and B, those kinds of things. So a patent claim is essentially a set. So anytime you pick up a patent and read it and read the claims, I would suggest looking at the claims and going, this claim covers the set of all things comprising elements A, B, and C, whatever those elements are in that claim. The preamble in the claim is this first part, and it typically has no meaning on the scope of the claim. So it's really the second part, elements A, B, and C. So you could have some other kind of controller, maybe it's not for games, but if it's got elements A, B, and C, it's likely that this claim would cover it. There are magic words in claims. One of those words is comprising, and you guys have probably seen that. Comprising means that the claim is open-ended. So if I say a game controller comprising elements A, B, and C, then in order to infringe, it has to have elements A, B, and C, but it can have all kinds of other elements as well, D, E, F, whatever. As long as it has elements A, B, and C in it, it infringes. And that's something that comes up a lot as our patent clients review patent claims. They start to worry. They read a claim and they say, it's got A, B, and C, but what about, you know, these other elements, you know? Well, you know, if it's got that word comprising in there, it's open-ended, so it can include those other elements, which makes it broad and allows it to be very broad. So this brings me to a key concept of patents that people can sometimes find surprising, and that is that patents can, and they usually do, cover future inventions. So think about this claim here. It's a pharmaceutical composition comprising a novel compound X, whatever that is, and a pharmaceutically acceptable excipient. An excipient is stuff that you put in there to make it into a pill or a capsule or whatever, right? So if after you file this patent application and you get this granted, somebody creates an awesome new excipient that nobody ever thought about before, that's still covered by this patent claim. So patent claims do cover future inventions. So something to keep in mind, which is important because you could imagine if they didn't cover future inventions, they wouldn't be very valuable, right? Because anybody could get around this claim by just, you know, inventing a new excipient, right? This is another key concept. The most common misunderstanding in patent law: if I have a valid patent, I have freedom to operate. And so this basically relates to, you know, clients will often say, well, okay, if my patent's claim is granted, then I have freedom to operate in the space where my patent covers, right? And the answer is no, not necessarily, because patents can intersect with each other and overlap each other. So you can often have a patent claim and not have freedom to operate. And just to be clear, by freedom to operate, I mean freedom to go out there and make and sell a product without infringing somebody else's patent. So one area where clients often get confused about patents is when they're thinking about patents, they're thinking about two different things. One is about the validity of the patent and is it patentable? The other is about infringement. Are you infringing? Is somebody else infringing your patent? That kind of thing. And it's really important to keep those two things separate as you think about patents. Otherwise, it'll muddle your thinking about, you know, what you're trying to accomplish. So validity, it's the patentability perspective. It's comparing the claim language to the prior art. And we'll get into that term prior art, which is basically anything that exists prior to you filing your patent application. So if a thing comprising elements A, B, and C isn't novel and non-obvious, the claim is going to be invalid. And then the infringement perspective, though, is comparing the claim language to an actual product or process. So validity is comparing it to prior art. Infringement is comparing it to something that actually is happening that could infringe, right? So in this case, anything comprising elements A, B, and C will infringe the claim, and anything without A or B or C will not infringe. So when you're trying to figure out if you infringe, you're saying, okay, well, it says A, B, and C. Can I, eliminate C, or can I eliminate B, or so that I can get around this claim and not infringe it? So kind of related to that, two perspectives of patenting and freedom to operate. So patentability perspective, which we just kind of talked about, is comparing my claim language to the prior art. Freedom to operate perspective is an infringement perspective, but it's about comparing others' claim language to my product or process. So do I have freedom to operate? Is my product or process going to infringe somebody else's patent? Another key concept is many granted patents are invalid, and many pending patent applications have overly broad claims that won't grant. So the patent process is like a negotiation. You go in there asking for more than what you're going to get. And so oftentimes those initial claims that are filed are very broad. So clients will come in and say, oh my gosh, look at this patent application. We're going to infringe this. This is a problem. We're really in trouble here. And the patent attorney will look at it and go, oh no, these claims are overly broad. They're never going to grant in that perspective, with that kind of scope. So just be aware of that a lot of patent claims are invalid. A lot of patent applications have overly broad claims. So don't panic when you see something that looks concerning. Just take a step back, time to think about it, work your way through it, and see if there really is a problem there. So I mentioned this term prior art a little bit, sort of a technical term from the patent world, and it's basically all information and documents and knowledge that existed before a patent application's filing date. This could be all kinds of things, published papers, published patents, and this is where clients often get in trouble. They don't think about all the things that they're creating that are prior art. The CEO goes and does a lecture and it gets put up on YouTube, right? I once helped to invalidate a patent using a YouTube lecture from a CEO where he just spilled the beans, what you put on LinkedIn. Everybody wants to get their, stuff up on LinkedIn so everybody can see the awesome work they're doing. All those LinkedIn posts are prior art to whatever your future patent applications are. Even abstracts or posters, all kinds of things, that anything that's published could be prior art and could essentially either knock out your patent or cause it to have to be narrowed, so that it's like, okay, well, I got a patent and it covers my product, but man, I could have had a really broad patent that would have covered all my competitors, as well. So keep in mind that this concept of prior art, and we'll be talking about that a little bit more as we go through.
Hey, Bill, there's a question in the chat.
Oh yeah, thank you.
Doug Miller says, if someone else's patent has already been granted, can it later be determined to be too broad or not novel and invalidated?
Yes, absolutely. And I'll talk a little bit about that, but the first thing that happens when someone goes to enforce a broad patent is you challenge it. You say, is it valid? And there are multiple ways to challenge it. You can challenge it in the patent office, what we call inter partes review, or you can challenge it in court. And that's always the first step of patent infringement lawsuit, is to challenge the breadth of the patent, and hopefully you can knock out the broad claims and get out from under the infringement allegation.
And another question just popped up, Bill. It says, how do academics deal with this prior art issue when they publish research data?
That's a great question too. So typically it's just about timing. So the best input for a patent application is a research paper that's already drafted. So what you really need is to just file that patent application before you publish that paper, right? So as you're getting to the point where you've got it drafted, and you're getting ready to submit it, then send it to the patent attorney or to the tech transfer office and say, hey, we're about to publish this. We want to get it protected. So they'll get the patent on file before it publishes.
Okay, and one more question. How do you ensure you don't fall into the category of being overly broad and get invalidated?
And I'll talk a little bit about that too. And basically the idea is that every patent has multiple claims and they have multiple scopes. So you go from broad down to narrow in multiple different ways. And so you create a patent that has, in order to challenge it, you would have to challenge all the claims. So if you have think about it like this, if you have a patent that's got 40 granted claims in it, it's like having 40 different patents. And in order to win, if all the claims cover the product that's infringing, in order to win, the infringer has to knock out all the claims, right? So it's sort of a numbers game and a scope game.
And then one more, and then we'll let you do another slide or two.
Okay, sounds good.
I have heard you can backdate your art and publications up to a year in arrears for a patent.
That's a good question. So in the US only, if you publish, you can file a patent application afterwards within the following year and get it protected in the US. But it knocks out all your patent protection in the rest of the world. So, if you do care about getting patent protection outside the US, which many companies do, then you don't want to rely on that. So talking about prior art, we just talked about kind of what it was, and I just want to mention there's this duty to disclose, and this is another place where clients often get themselves in trouble. So there's a duty of candor and good faith to the patent office. You have to provide to the patent office all information that you know about that it's material to the patentability of the invention. So it applies to all the individuals associated with the filing and prosecution of the patent application, including your attorneys and anybody involved. And the purpose is, to make sure that the patent office is aware of and evaluates all the prior art in order to, make the best possible decision about your patent application. So this duty applies while the patent application is pending and up until the date it grants. So sometimes you get what we call a notice of allowance, and the patent office says, hey, we're going to allow your claim. It's going to grant in a few months. Congratulations. And then you look around and go, oh, crap, I didn't submit this prior art that I know about. So then you have to go back to the patent office and say, well, let's withdraw that notice of allowance and put this thing back into prosecution again and go back to the drawing board about whether our claims are valid. So you don't want that to happen. So it's really important to make sure that you're disclosing this stuff to the patent office. So look, key concept here, if you don't disclose to the patent office, prior art, then your patent could be invalidated because you didn't follow the rules, right? And so you can imagine in a situation where you've gone out and you've sued a competitor and they've said, hey, this patent's invalid because these guys didn't submit their prior art. They actually published a paper that's got their names on it, so they knew about it, right? And they didn't submit it, right? That's the worst case scenario. So if you published a relevant paper, abstract, poster, or et cetera, and you're an author, then definitely make sure to disclose that, because that's definitely a ticking time bomb for your patent if you don't. So moving into some of the requirements for patentability. So I'll talk about patents from a validity perspective. And the first question is always, are the patent claims novel? So we've got our method again, a method comprising elements A, B, and C. Its validity is determined based on the prior art, which we talked about, all kinds of publications. I've got a little paper in here. If the claim is going to be invalid for lack of novelty, if all the elements are found in one reference. So I've got one paper in here. It's got elements A, B, and C. This claim is going to be invalid, right? So that's the first hurdle that you have to get past, is to make sure that it's basically novel. It's not found in any prior art in one particular reference.
Hey, Bill, we have another question in the chat is, what about presentations published in YouTube but later withdrawn, taken out? Is that also considered prior art?
Now, I've never dealt with that particular question, but it's there's a lot of things that can happen that get in kind of a gray zone, right? And so like a presentation that maybe you go give a presentation and we call it transient. Like you didn't hand out any copies of it. You didn't like publish it. So you gave it, but it went away and it's not out there anymore, right? So there are some circumstances like that where it would not be prior art. But essentially what you want to try to avoid is those gray zones, because that's what's going to be litigated, right? So you're going to have to spend millions of dollars explaining that and trying to make the argument that it's not going to knock your patent out. So yeah, it could be a gray zone. You could win that argument, but it's best to not have to make that argument in the first place. So here's another key concept, and we call it the person of ordinary skill in the art. And frankly, this is one of the weirdest things about patent law, I'd say. So it's a hypothetical person. This person's considered to have the normal skills and knowledge in a particular technical field, which we call the art, without being a genius. So this serves as a reference for thinking about whether an invention is not obvious in US patent law or in European patent law if it involves an inventive step. So and basically the law says if it would have been obvious for this fictional person to invent the thing, then the invention is considered not patentable. So a lot of imagining yourself in the shoes of this person of ordinary skill in the art. So that comes into play in the second hurdle, which is non-obviousness. And so we have our method. It comprises A, B, and C. So this is determined based on prior art and this person of ordinary skill in the art. And so practically, the claim is going to be invalid for lack of novelty, for obviousness. Sorry, that's wrong on my slide. If all the elements A, B, and C are found in multiple references. So here I have multiple references, right? Got A and B in one and C in another one. So the patent office says, would these references be combined by a person of ordinary skill? In other words, is it kind of in their field, with kinds of things they'd be reading, right? And you've got A and B in one, and you've got C in the other. If they would combine those to get A, B, and C, then that would be lacking in what would be obvious, and so not valid. So as an example, I was once doing a patent on a tissue processor for, processing a tissue which required for biopsy, which required sort of squishing the tissue. Sorry, this is a little bit gross, but and the patent office cited an orange juice maker, and they said, "Oh, you've got the squishing thing here. It's an orange juice maker. It makes orange juice." So we went back and said, "Look, yeah, okay, but a person of ordinary skill in the art would not be expected to know about the art of orange juice makers, if they're working in the biopsy field." So we were able to get around that one. But that's just an example.
Bill, we got two more questions in the chat. One is, how can you challenge a competitor's pending patent when you know there is prior art? You mentioned patent office and court. How can I inform the patent office? Do I just write an email to them?
Well, that's a good question. It's actually a really huge thing to challenge a patent. It's very expensive. So most people don't actually challenge it. You just sort of sit back and wait to see if they ever sue you, right? Because they may never sue you, and you don't want to spend the money challenging it if they sue you. But if you file what we call an IPR with the patent office, it's like almost $1 million worth of like legal expenses to do that. So usually people won't challenge those things. They'll just sit back and wait. Take a wait and see approach. And then usually the other party's not going to sue you until you get to an economic place where you're making a lot of money. And so it kind of works out for both sides that by the time you do get sued, hopefully you're making the money needed to defend yourself from that suit.
And then a couple more questions. How gray is the posita issue if the idea for the invention has been had and tried by many, but no one has made it work successfully until my way came up?
Oh, that's a great place to be in, because that's one of the classic arguments that you can make for patentability, is that, hey, we call it a long felt need in the art, that it's been long known that we need this. Nobody's been able to achieve it. I finally was able to make the tweaks that are necessary to make it work, and so I deserve a patent, and that's a really good place to be.
And then one more, do IP disclosures and the date of disclosure that we usually have to do in academic institutions have any relevance regarding patentability of an idea?
No, so that's a good question. So I take that to mean like submission of an invention disclosure to the tech transfer office to get your invention patented. That doesn't have any weight in terms of the dates, that you need to establish in order to establish patentability. It used to, back in the old days, we used to be a first to invent country in the US. Everybody else was first to file. So first to invent, meaning if there was a competition in the patent office over two people inventing the same thing, the first person to invent won. But now we're first to file, meaning whoever gets to the patent office first is the winner. So the main thing here is to just be quick to getting your new inventions filed, especially if you're in a field where things are moving along quickly and lots of people are filing patent applications, which is often the case. Lots of people will rush towards the same thing. So think about gene editing or cell therapy or a lot of these areas where people are basically trying to protect the same thing.
Okay, and then one more, and then we'll let you do more slides. What about a completely novel application of an established set of elements, particularly if the application is not obvious?
Yeah, that's definitely patentable. So you wouldn't be able to patent the precise set of elements, but you could patent it as a novel use of those elements, for example. Or if there's some other element that is needed to make it useful, then you could patent that. But yeah, that's definitely the kind of thing that's patentable. In fact, that sort of covers most all patents. Most things aren't really brand new. They're new arrangements, new ways of using older things, right? So yeah, that's a great thing to patent. So we talked earlier about how do you make sure that you're not the one who gets your patent knocked out because the claims are overly broad, and this is how you do that, right? So you create multiple layers of protection. So these circles represent patent claims 1, 2, and 3, and each has a different level of detail, right? So the outer one has all the elements A, B, and C, and then I add element D in claim 2 and element E in claim 3. And so when these get challenged, if we find elements A, B, and C in the prior art, claims 2 and 3 still stand, right? And if the infringing product is in the middle of the 2 and 3, then you can block that infringing product. This is also an example of independent claims and dependent claims. So just keep in mind that an independent claim doesn't depend on any other claims. It stands alone, like this one, a device comprising elements A, B, and C. But then these other claims depend back on claim 1 or claim 2. So the device of claim 1 further comprising D. So that means it has all the elements of claim 1 plus this element D. So A, B, C, D here. Same thing for E. So keep that in mind when you're reading through patent claims. Usually there are 1 or 2 or 3 independent claims, and then there are lots and lots of dependent claims. And you read those dependent claims to include everything that they depend from.
The question on that, Bill, is the patent layering only possible when making the first filing, or can a future patent layer?
Yeah, every patent should be layering for sure. Yeah. So future patents can layer as well. So back to the infringement perspective, if we have our claim, a game controller comprising elements A, B, and C, if we're comparing the claim to a thing or process, which we talked about as the infringement perspective, the game controller has A, B, and C, so it infringes the claim. It doesn't matter that it also includes D, right? So just keep that in mind. Another key concept that comes up a lot in conversations with clients is, sometimes clients come to us and we say, hey, you should, add this thing into your claim, and they say, oh, but, if that's Roche's, technique. And if we do that, we'll be infringing Roche's patent and they'll come and sue us. But the key thing to keep in mind here is only an infringing act, making, using, selling, importing a patented product or process can infringe a patent. So a patent can't infringe another patent. So it gives you a lot of opportunity, because you could go to, let's say you're patenting something and you say, oh yeah, so Roche has something similar and we could kind of work our thing into their thing and kind of have a combo thing, patent that, because then you'll be blocking Roche, right? And then they'll be wanting to, if they really think it's valuable, they'll be wanting to get a license to that or to buy your company because of that.
A couple other questions, Bill. Is it beneficial to file a new patent or group a few in the same patent?
It depends on the circumstances. We often do group a lot of different things into the same patent because it's financially better. You know, you don't have to pay as many patent filing fees and that kind of thing, and you can stretch your costs out to the future. But if you want to be aggressive and you want to get patents faster, and that's what's important to you, then you would want to file multiple patents in parallel, patent applications in parallel.
And another question, could someone easily defend a patent for a medical device, say hernia mesh, strictly from the material being used? Or is it the process to transform the polymer into the device?
It just depends on the particular facts of that case. Like if the material being used is novel and non-obvious, you could patent that. You could also patent the method of making it and the method of using it. And those are some of the kinds of things we'll get into in those breakout sessions for sure.
Great.
So this is what I call the Star Wars perspective on patents. So patents being like force fields your business, right? And we talked about layering patents to protect yourself. And so the broader patents are like the outer force fields. They're more subject to attack. And so we talked about when you get into litigation, somebody sues you or you sue somebody, the first thing is that you're going to try to knock out their patent claims, right? And so that happens during litigation or with patent office procedures like we discussed. And so let's say you find a piece of prior art that's within the scope of the broader claim, then you knock that out and there's no more broad claim, right? So if it's you and your product is out here, you just alleviated yourself from patent infringement, right? You're not going to infringe. But if you have multiple force fields and you happen to be in here or your competitor happens to be in here, then there's still an infringement issue. All the claims have to be knocked out in that case. So another key concept is that a patent application it's a really odd document. I don't know if you guys have read many patent applications, but they read in really strange ways, right? And the reason for that is that a patent application is basically, it's not a thesis, it's a collection of backup positions for a negotiation with the patent office. So thus you get into stuff like this, right? And you're reading, okay, in some cases it's like 50%, at least 55%, 60, 65%, 70, 75. You're building, those are to build in all those layers that you can use in the claim, right? So if you find later that, 84%, was out there in the art, then you can start with 85%, and so it builds in all those layers. So that's why patent applications are really horribly wordy and difficult to read. So here's an example. So for a drafting patent application perspective, nested layers of things can really help strengthen your patent application. So let's just say that you have data that shows that you have a process and the pH for the process, the really sweet spot is between 8 and 10, right? And the sweet spot is 9 or something. Actually, I probably should make it 8. Let's say it's 8. Right. And so your patent attorney is going to come to you and say, we want multiple ranges here. We don't want to just patent 8, right? We want to patent multiple ranges. So give us like an outer range, like outside that range, it just doesn't work. So we want to cover everything that potentially works. And then a narrow ideal range, it's like, okay, it really works well in this ideal range. And then some kind of intermediate range. And so essentially what you're doing then is suddenly if there's prior art that's kind of inside this outer range, that outer range goes away. Now you have these inner ranges. And frankly, like this may seem like a small thing, but it's like one of the most common things in prosecuting a patent that you get your claim, your outer range knocked out and you didn't include these other ranges and you have no backup position basically. So you lose your ability to patent. So when thinking about helping your patent counsel draft your patent applications well, think about, these different kinds of ranges so that you can build that kind of strength into your patents. Another key concept is functional limitations. So up here, we're talking about, okay, pHs, specific pHs, right? But maybe you don't know exactly where the edge of those ranges is, right? Well, you can set those limits functionally. So you could say, you know, a pH selected to produce a yield greater than 50%, or something that's sort of basically an experimental setup. So we don't know exactly what the pH needs to be, but if it produces a yield greater than 50%, that's our range. Okay. So think about these functional ranges when you're filing your patent applications. Another key concept is hierarchies of classification. So another really common thing is you get into a patent application and maybe you've said screw, you know, you're using a screw to attach something, right? So you said there's a screw in there, and then the patent attorney came along and said, you know, a device for coupling two things together. So you have like those two languages in there. So they filed device for coupling two things together. The patent office finds a device. It's not a screw, it's some other device. And then that gets knocked out, and suddenly your claim's limited to a screw, right? And like, that's really narrow, right? You don't want a product that has two things fastened together that can only be fastened together by a screw, right? So think about building out what I call hierarchies of classification. So, you know, if you've got screws, sorry, this is kind of small, but, you know, well, what are some parallel things to screws? Bolts and nuts and, you know, those kinds of things, and clamps and whatever. And then think about like mid-level categories that could cover lots of these different lower level categories, like threaded fasteners or clamping fasteners, and all the way up, maybe fasteners your highest thing. So then if you have screw and then the prior art is bolt, you don't have to go all the way down to screw. You can say, oh, well, we also cover clamping, fasteners, welding, adhesive, stapling, interlocking, you know, et cetera. So think about building out these hierarchies of classification for different parts of your patent claims. And just a tip is I use ChatGPT to do this one. It's great for like saying, okay, well, what are the alternatives for this? You know, what are some languages? What are some, if I have a whole bunch of these, what are the groupings or categories that I can use for those? This will really help strengthen your claims. Okay, so moving to, how are we doing on time, by the way? So we got, okay, 10, 11, okay, got a little time.
Yeah.
So now I'm going to move to sort of the process of filing the patent application and the timing and all that. So we often start with a provisional patent application. It's a patent application that just sits there in the patent office for 1 year and then it goes away. If you don't do anything, it just dies, and that's the end of it. It never gets published. It's confidential. And it's got a priority date. That establishes your priority date. It's one of our key concepts. The prior art is stuff that happens before the priority date. So getting that priority date is important. And then the end of it, we call it a conversion date. It means you need to do something with it. You file a regular application to keep it going. But it's a good way to get a quick application filed in the patent office. Another concept is the concept of rolling provisionals. So, and patent attorneys really like this, because let's say you're working away in your lab, you're doing lots of work over the course of a year. You file a first provisional, but you're like, hey, we're still working on this. We're coming up with all kinds of new ideas. We're probably going to change it. So we say, hey, we'll just keep updating this provisional and filing again as a second provisional and a third provisional as many times as we need to during the course of that year. But that priority date sets that 1 year, that first one, right? And these other ones you filed during the course of that year, and they add to it. So all the new stuff you come up with during that year, you can protect as quickly as you can. And this comes into play with regard to publication. Somebody asked about if you're an academic, and then what about publications? So let's say you filed your patent application, and after that you're writing a paper, and you're like, oh yeah, we've got this awesome paper. It has some of the stuff from this first application in it, but it also has some stuff that's not in there. Well, go ahead and file that second application before you publish that paper, and then that'll protect you from the disclosures that are in the paper.
Hey, Bill, we have a question. If a provisional patent is not converted, are the concepts still considered prior art?
They aren't. Yeah, so it goes away, and it's not a publication, and it doesn't come back to haunt you in any way in terms of prior art. So backing out a little bit, extending that out. So we talked about the provisional application. You've got that provisional year, and then you've got a patent application you file after that. That's gonna grant at some point. It's got a 20-year term from the date of the end of that provisional year. So it's effectively 21 years from the provisional filing. And then there are different ways of getting patent term extensions. Pharma products have special ways, which we'll talk about in the breakout session. But even ordinary patent applications can get patent term extension for delays in the patent office if the patent office isn't doing their job and getting things done quickly. So 20-year term.
Okay, Bill, another question. How much info needs to be disclosed in provisional update number 2 and number 3?
Yeah, so essentially you want to disclose everything that you can in order to fully flesh out your invention. And so let's say if you're going to file a paper, you want there to be nothing inventive in the paper that's not already in, say, provisional 2, right? So you want to fully cover all that, but being as expansive as you possibly can, you basically get out of it what you put into it. So the more expansive it is, the better it's going to be for you in the long run. So this is just an illustration of a whole patent family. It's kind of small print, sorry, but it's hopefully you don't need to read it. It's just sort of just to give you an overall view. So we have the provisionals, 1, 2, and 3, the rolling provisionals we just talked about. At the end of that year, you could file a PCT application, which is an international patent application. It keeps your international rights alive, including your US rights. By international, we mean kind of like above nationalities. It covers all the countries that are members of the PCT, which means Patent Cooperation Treaty. There are some countries that aren't members of the PCT, just a few, like Taiwan's an important one. China kept Taiwan out of that treaty. So if you want to protect in Taiwan, you have to file at the end of that provisional year. And then at the end of the PCT period, you have to file in the various countries wherever you want to file. So this is a whole patent family. It sort of just shows you kind of how it progresses over time, over several years, starting from when you file that first provisional. It's expensive, like represented in this patent family is maybe $50,000 to $100,000 worth of legal expenses and fees and things over the course of these years to protect in a bunch of different in several different countries. So just keep that in mind. But this is the overall process. So sort of backing down into the US patent application. So how does that flow? You know, you've got that provisional year, you establish your priority date, it's confidential in the patent office, there's no examination. And then you file your regular patent application. And then you get these various kinds of communications from the patent office. And you're going back and forth from the patent office in that negotiation to say, can we get a patent out of this or not? And this is where a lot of clients, sometimes they think, oh, well, I filed my patent application. I'm kind of done with that expense. I'm not going to have to worry about it. But then there are all these other expenses that happen all along the process. Great for patent attorneys, not so great for clients. At the end of that, 2 or 3 years, maybe you have a patent or maybe you still don't. If you don't, then you have to keep it going and do further prosecution and keep arguing. So this could go on for several years. And with expenses occurring all along the process, and ultimately, hopefully, you get a granted patent, and you've got some grant fees, and then you can move on. But this overall process can easily be like a $20,000 to $40,000 process from beginning to end, and a lot just depends on, how much, what kind of examiner you got. Were they picky? Did they push back a lot? Were they digging their heels in and you really had to go back lots of times to convince them? Or if they accept it right away, it'll be a lot less expensive. So this illustrates the concept that, you need to keep your patent application going. So right before that patent grants, you can file a second patent application in the same family. So what happens a lot of times is you file a patent application back over here. The examiner says, hey, you've got like 5 different inventions in this thing. Like you can only have 1 invention in a patent. So cut out 4 of them and we'll pursue 1. So you pursue 1 all the way to patent grant, but you've got 4 other ones in there that you're like, hey, we need to protect those. And so this is where you can file that second patent application as long as you file it before the grant of this first patent application, and it'll have priority all the way back to this priority date. So that way this application won't be prior to this application.
And Bill, a question we have is, what is the starting time point to count the patent term, the first provisional filing date or the date of the patent being approved?
It starts from you get a free year for the provisional year. So essentially it starts from the beginning of this first application, this date right here. Can you see my mouse? Right here. So, yeah. So another key concept here is keeping patent families alive. So remember I said you can file that second application if you file it before this first one grants. If you let it grant and you don't file it, that's the end. You can't protect any of those other inventions. You can't do anything further with that patent family. And that can be really devastating. So let's say you filed it, you got this thing granted, and then you don't file another application. And then let's say you go out and you find that your competitor's infringing and they found a way around this first application. But in your overall application, you had description of what your competitor is doing. Well, you could have gotten claims that covered your competitor. But if you let that grant without filing the second application, you can't. So one of the key things that, when companies are acquiring IP or licensing IP, acquiring your company and looking at the value of your IP, they want to see that these things are open. First of all, they think they can do a better job than you, right? So they're like, hey, whatever they did is not going to be as good as what we're going to do with this patent portfolio. So we're going to take it, go back and mine more claims and expand it and file 10 more patent applications out of it, right? So if you've let that lapse, you can't do that. So think always about the value of the portfolio in the hands of an acquirer and what they're going to want to do with that in order to maximize the value of the portfolio. So another concept here is, publication. So these applications will publish and then they'll become prior art to future inventions that you might want to file on. So one of the things that we always do is docket this 18-month publication date. So it's 18 months from the beginning of this provisional year. If this first patent's going to publish. And if you file, let's say you've been making all kinds of cool improvements during that time, and you want to file a patent application on that, if you file it after the 18-month date, your first application is going to be prior art to your second application. So you're going to have to argue to the patent office that everything in your second application is novel and non-obvious over your first patent application, right? But if you file that second application right before that 18-month date, then your first application won't be prior art. So usually in terms of, you're starting a new company, you've got your first application, maybe one or two patent applications, always be thinking about that publication date and getting in there to protect anything new that you've worked on before that publication date happens. Another key concept, so data in patent applications is super important. Like the scope of the breadth of the claims that you can get depends directly on the data that you can show. It's more important in some areas than others. If you have like a purely mechanical device, let's say you invented a new hammer, you don't need any data for that. Somebody can look at a drawing of it and say, oh, here's how it works, right? But if you're doing something that's in life sciences or green tech, where you're actually doing research and you're showing that this thing works better than what was out there before, then having data is super important. Just to give an example, like the Supreme Court, that case that I showed you earlier, that was invalidated by the Supreme Court. They had designed a bunch of antibodies for use as a drug. They designed 26 different antibodies that worked, but they claimed all antibodies that bound to a particular epitope or protein. And the Supreme Court said, nope, that's too broad. Like 20, you only showed 26. There are potentially thousands that would work. And you didn't, it's not broad enough for you to get that broad claim. So keep in mind that data is really helpful. So responding to infringement. So what happens, let's say if you got a patent and somebody infringes, what usually companies try not to infringe other people's patents. So one thing that I hear a lot is, oh, big companies, they don't care. They just go out and infringe our patents. Well, they actually do care. They won't look at it and go, oh, this is a company a small company. They don't have the money to sue us. They'll look at it and go, this is a small company. They don't have the money to sue us, but our big behemoth competitor may buy them and they'll then be able to enforce this against us. So they don't want to infringe other people's patents. But when a company does infringe, what can you do? A patent lawsuit, super expensive, over $1 million, easy to file and prosecute a patent lawsuit. So you don't want to do that unless you're going to make a lot more than $1 million for that. So generally speaking, it's a do nothing and just monitor the situation until you get to a place where it really matters, and then you file a patent lawsuit, right? So you just do nothing but monitor. Another possibility is to send a cease and desist letter where you say, hey, you're infringing my patent, don't do that. That's kind of tricky because if you do it in the wrong way, then the other company can sue you to invalidate your patent, which you want to try to avoid. And then the last thing you can do is file a patent infringement lawsuit. So one of the sort of considerations when you think about, okay, well, do I want to file a patent infringement lawsuit or not, is, what could I get from it? And the things that you can get from a patent lawsuit are pretty specific. You can get lost profits, which means you kind of have to go out and show you with some economic data saying, I make, widget X, and I sold 10,000 less widget X's because my competitor sold widget X's that he made or she made to somebody else, right? So you have to show your lost profits, and you can get paid those lost profits. You can also get a reasonable royalty. Oftentimes lost profits are just impossible to show because the economic data is just impossible to get. So a reasonable royalty basically says, well, hey, in this pharma space, royalties when people license patents are usually 3%. And, this is a pretty typical patent portfolio. So we should get 3% of their profits or of their revenues. So you can get a reasonable royalty. You can also sometimes get an injunction, which is kind of rare in some fields, but basically if you're in a field where it's a product that's saving people's lives, like pharma or diagnostics or something like that, it's hard to get, and you probably don't want to get an injunction because it's actually going to hurt people. So courts want to award injunctions. But if you're in a field like where that's not the case, then you can get an injunction, which basically is a court ordering the other party not to make and sell the thing anymore. One thing to keep in mind, sometimes people worry about getting in trouble for infringing patents. There's no criminal liability, so you won't get put in jail for infringing a patent. Another key concept I think is really important for startup companies is to think about diligence every day. Like, what is that next inflection point where your patent portfolio and all your legal documents and everything else about your company is going to get scrutinized by an investor? Sort of say maybe it's a seed round, or maybe it's a Series A, or whatever that next thing is. You should always be thinking about, okay, when that happens and we're under the magnifying glass, how are we going to be able to respond well, right? And because there are lots of things that can go wrong that you don't want to be fixing in the middle of trying to negotiate a deal, and because the deal could completely fall through, right? And so patent problems are those kinds of patents. So, and a good example is recently we had a deal we were working on, and the client was said, oh yeah, we licensed these patents from MIT. We said, well, okay, what are the milestone requirements for that? And we looked back at the milestone requirements, which are things that they were supposed to do to keep that patent license. They hadn't done those things. So they're right in the middle of negotiating a deal. And then now they're going to have to go try to get MIT's attention to negotiate an amendment to the license. And that is a stressful place to be. You don't want to be in that kind of situation. So think about diligence every day. It means things like keeping, your CDAs. Like, I've got signatures from both parties on my CDA, my confidential disclosure agreements, and I've got them stored away somewhere, and I know when they expire, and I know what they cover. All the way down to that kind of level of detail. Being really organized about everything is super helpful.
Hey, Bill, I have a question in the chat from Lisa Padilla. What about attorney's fees? I think it was on the slide previous. Might need to have Lisa jump in on this one.
Bill, you were talking about damages, and I didn't know if, the $2.2 billion award means to me a significant amount of legal fees and costs. So did the winning party get attorney's fees and costs as a result of this? Is there a attorney fee?
You can, yeah, absolutely. I don't know about that particular case, but you certainly can. Yeah. And one thing that I didn't mention is if the infringement is willful, meaning that you knew about the patent and you just decided to infringe it anyway, you can get the damages tripled. So you could suddenly go from 2.2 billion to 6.6 billion because you willfully infringe somebody's patent. That's something to think about. So what investor perspective, this is kind of my final slide here, but just thinking back through all this, and you're building this portfolio, you want to be ready to show the value of it to your investors. So what are they going to want to know? What about your patent what about your technology is protectable? What's your patent strategy? They're going to look at your patents and say, are they valid? They're going to do prior art searches and throw papers at you and say, well, what about this paper? And what about this patent from your competitor? Right. So you want to be making sure you're looking at that stuff in advance so that you don't get caught by surprise by something that's like really obviously a problem. Right. Trade secrets. So you didn't talk much about trade secrets, but being careful to protect your trade secrets, any secrets that are important to your business are trade secrets. So making sure you're using confidentiality agreements before you share those with anybody else, sharing them with only if you need to, if you really need to, those kinds of things. We have a whole memo. If anybody's interested, I can send you a memo on how to protect your trade secrets. And then infringement risk, they're going to want to know, are there any patents that you're just going to run headlong into when you launch your product, right? Do you understand your patent space? Are you confident that you're going to not get sued for infringement right out of the door? Because the last thing they want is to use $1 million of their investment to defend a patent lawsuit, right? And then contracts. Have you been careful with the IP terms? A lot of times, for example, people will go out to contract manufacturers, for example, and they're notorious for having IP terms that give them ownership of the IP that you're paying them to create, right? Out of the gate, that's usually where they start, right? And if you haven't sort of been careful about negotiating those terms, you could be in a situation where, oh yeah, we've got this great manufacturing process, we're ready to roll it out, but oh, by the way, we're probably going to have to negotiate a license with our contract manufacturer because they own it all, because we didn't pay attention to the IP terms. So pay careful attention to all that stuff, and with compliance with important contract terms as well. Like I mentioned, that MIT license, that had its requirements for keeping the license, making sure that you're doing all those things. So that is the end. Thank you for bearing with me through that whole presentation. And yeah, if there are any other questions, I'd be happy to answer those if we have time.
I see a comment from Lisa that says due diligence always includes speaking with the patent attorney.
It often does. Oftentimes we'll have patent attorney to patent attorney calls. So like the investors will have their own patent attorney who's doing diligence on the patents, and we'll jump on a call with them and talk through the portfolio.
And then both Doug and Nicholas are very interested in seeing the trade secret memo.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Drop me an email. Kevin has my email address if you need it. And I'll be happy to send that to you.
Christian says the slides are awesome. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay,
Maybe we can get that trade secret document to everyone.
Oh, that's a great idea. Yeah. I
yeah,
can send
if you
it to
wouldn't
guys and
mind.
you could distribute it out. Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, love it.
Okay.
Fantastic presentation.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bill. So we're going to take a 13-minute break. We're going to come back at 10:45, and we're going to go into the field of focus verticals and dive a little deeper.
Cool. Sounds good. Thank you.
Right. Thanks, everybody. Yourself. All right, great. Julie, I know you were kind of in the mid case. We'd love to kind of get a peek at the slides, but we have 15 minutes here to really talk about if there's any outstanding questions, if you want to share any aha moments, anything that hasn't been addressed so far. So we'll kind of open it up. I saw, Dave, you had a question in chat that we didn't get to. So if a drug was approved for the indication X, but we have doctors prescribing off-label for Y, which is an indication patented by somebody else, are there legal ramifications? Are we allowed to have medical science liaisons going to doctors and telling them we have a therapeutic benefit for indication Y?
Yeah, so less so a patent issue than, you can't direct physicians to prescribe drugs for indications that have not been approved, right? That would be a regulatory issue, right? If physicians are prescribing drugs for indications that haven't been tested in clinical trials, right? So that's a question there. There's also sort of layers to that question of, insurance reimbursement for indications that have not been approved. Will insurance, cover the cost of a drug that has not been approved? But that's a little bit less of a patent question as it is more of a sort of a regulatory question.
As long as there's no legal ramifications there, that's exactly what I was asking. Thank you.
Sure.
All right, other questions? I see Nicholas, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I had a quick one, if possible. We're currently in negotiations with another startup to potentially license our technology. And as a team, one of our biggest concerns is what are some rules of the road when it comes to obligations to commercialize? This startup that we potentially could pair up with has their own technologies that potentially could play a role in decision making on what they bring to market, and whether or not, the big concern for us being, is this a defensive play on their part? And so what are some best practices or thoughts that you have related to, that type of scenario?
Yeah, I agree. You absolutely want to have some obligations to commercialize, and on a specific time frame. That stuff can be, very carefully negotiated. Sometimes it's some of the most difficult parts to negotiate, but and then you can also use financial penalties and things like that to sort of incentivize that commercialization as well, and make sure that you're getting some kind of remuneration if it's not happening.
All right, other questions? Who wants to share their biggest aha moment of the day? Go ahead, Asgur. Am I saying your name right? I hope.
Not the aha moment, but I have a question. So my question is related to limitations on the freedom to operate. Let's say 2 or 3 competitive companies have different drugs with respect to chemistry for the same target, and they are basically aiming the same diseases. So is there any issue there as long as the drugs have different chemistry and all 3 companies claimed in their patents the same disease as a broad disease?
Yeah, I think that's probably to me. It comes down to the claims. So let's say the 3 different companies, right? You look at the patent applications they filed, and their patents claim different molecules for the same disease. So each individual company is not going to have a problem. They won't have a freedom to operate problem with the other companies if that's the extent of the claims. Now, sometimes the first party to get to a space, let's say you're the first party to have a G12D KRAS inhibitor, you might have tried to claim more than that. You might have tried to claim any KRAS G12D inhibitor more generically, where you don't come in on the precise molecule, right? You don't specify exactly what the molecule is. That could be a freedom to operate block, let's say, if you're in the KRAS G12D space, for example, because that's a more generic claim. So I think you always want to have your eye out for, yes, the other party has a patent and a claim to their molecule, but if they were the first player in the space, or if they were an early arriver to the mechanism, do they have a broader claim that you need to search for? Does that make sense?
Great. Lisa, I see you got your hand up.
I have an aha moment that I want to share. You know, I've always thought that it was important to get your formation documents in place before you did anything else. And now I'm absolutely convinced it's more important to have your patent lawyer on speed dial to be able to help you figure out what I'm going to call a value proposition. Bill showed that like an arrow of all the different pieces of opportunities for us to develop our IP and protect it. I feel like almost that's more important than doing the initial corporate lawyer stuff, because if you don't have that patent, you don't have value, and if you don't have value, you got nothing. So that was my aha moment.
Yeah, I would say we're often the first attorneys that many early stage companies have ever worked with,
Yeah.
which is good because a lot of us are pretty versed in science. And maybe it's a good segue into working with attorneys. But yes, it's pretty important to work closely with your patent attorney as early on as possible, as
Yeah.
Bill mentioned.
Yeah.
I see in
Lisa,
the, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, Lisa, I'm gonna piggyback on that real quick and just say I'm wondering if we're talking to the right patent attorney with our company, because we didn't cover nearly this quantity of information. So now I'm starting to question our choices and just how important this is. So
That's a tough situation to be in, Jessica. And you know what? There's always opportunities for second opinions.
that's good to know.
Okay, I see a couple of comments in the chat. Angela saying, my biggest aha moment is probably the prior art issue. We'll need to think about how we approach publishing and sharing our work if we also want to pursue a patent. And Izzy shares, my biggest aha moment was realizing all the ways my patent attorneys were taking care of our company more than I even realized. All right, any other questions or comments?
I actually had a question or an aha moment, and that leads to a question actually. First off, just want to thank everyone that presents today. It was drink from a fire hose, but amazing information that's invaluable for all of us. But the aha moment was that, and I think I kind of knew this, but it's just when you see it on a slide, it's, you know, very sobering that many patents are invalid or are not likely valid. I guess the question is, given the fact that patents are obviously they're invalid as such because they're written by people, and given the level of complexities, are there instances where one patent attorney or firm may say that this was valid and another firm might say, actually, it is not? And how would you navigate kind of situations like in that circumstance?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, we're advocates as attorneys for our clients, and so it's not going to be that uncommon for, you know, patents to be in a kind of a gray zone where one party has their attorney is saying, hey, your patent's valid, and the other party's attorney is saying, no, it's not. And so it needs to be you know, litigated potentially to find out the actual answer. But it sounds to me like what you're saying is like your own patent attorneys, you've got two different ones who agree or disagree on validity of your own patent. Is that what you're thinking, or somebody else's patent?
Right. Yeah. And this wouldn't be like where you're actually going into litigation, but say in the instance that you're actually moving forward with something, you might actually have two different attorneys that had dissenting opinions on how you should actually formulate.
Yeah. Yeah, I think regardless, they would probably both agree that, building in multiple layers of claims that have varying breadth and various word choices would strengthen your portfolio. And so they may have some disagreements over whether one particular version of that is valid or not. But the best thing to do is just to build in those layers of protection, I think, to make sure that when you litigate, you have a lot of options.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments before we wrap up? Nope. Oscar, I see your hands up.
So I have one more question for Julia. So if you have already patented and also nationalized your patent in different countries for a specific core structure of a drug, and you still continue and developing it further with several other analogs for the same disease or different disease, so should this be added to the existing patent which is already published, or should it be a totally new patent? Or can it be because the previous patent could be as prior art?
Yeah, that's a great question. So that's not uncommon, and there is a good amount of discussion that goes into the timing of the first filing as to where you are with analoging. So let's say you file your PROV and you already have 30 molecules, and you think you're going to be picking out your DC within about 18 months. And so it makes sense because you're probably going to be done analoging that at about the 12-month stage to the PROV. Right. So for the most part, you're going to get most compounds into that application. But you're right, there are compounds that might show up after you continue to analog, maybe new indications that show up after the first case has converted to a PCT. Now, the first thing I'll say is that you should not be trying to add new compounds into that first case after it publishes. There's something called a CIP. Stay away from it. If you hear your patent attorney mention it, walk away. They are not a good option. So you don't want to be adding in compounds into the first filing. But you want to think about those later compounds. How do they relate to the first filing? So can you generically cover them in the first filing and potentially specifically cover them in a later filing? Because that could be a bit of a strategy that you file on the later molecules before the first case publishes. You get a full year to develop those out, and it won't face the first case as prior art because you filed on it before the first case published. So there is a strategy, and we're always asking right before the first case publishes, we will be bugging the client and saying, okay, do you have any more analogs? Do you have any more? Are you thinking about some new uses with these? Because we might want to get a new filing on before your initial composition case publishes at 18 months. But if you take nothing away, don't try and add molecules into an existing case. And if someone says CIP, it's a problem. It's going to be a problem down the road.
Thank you.
In the therapeutic space. In other art areas, I think there may be some viability to them, but in the therapeutic space, CIPs are a bad choice. A good question.
All right, we are right at time. Bill, Julia, Dalton, thank you so very much for hosting us today and sharing your insights. I don't know, Bill, do you have any final words you'd like to share with the group?
Well, thanks for having us. It was great, a lot of fun. And if you have any questions afterwards, I think you can get to us through Kevin or my emails in the chat chain, and maybe the other speakers could put theirs in there as well. And you're welcome to email us and with any additional questions.
Excellent.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much. So,
Thank you.
Ross or Ravi, can you share my final slides? All right, there we go. So just to wrap up, we're going to give you some homework for this week. And again, we keep giving you these pieces. They build on one another. They help kind of get you thinking through, and they're going to be very useful for us when we get to the point where we're actually putting together your pitch strategy and ultimately some of the pieces that should go in your data room. So One of the things we're going to ask you to do is complete your version of the strategy compass that applies to your selection. So we're actually going to give you a framework that goes a little bit deeper into the strategy compass. It's a version that was put together by the MIT Engineering, Technology, Innovation, and Entrepreneurship program. And so they take it a little bit deeper into evaluating your customer, your technology competition. We have a slide on that, so maybe we should hold on that. We're going to ask you to do a competitive matrix. And we want you to keep checking in on Slack. So we're posting news, events, investments that are curated to the companies that are in the cohort in there. So we're pulling up news that's kind of specific. If you can go to the next slide. So this is the MIT framework. And as I said, it's a little bit deeper than where we went today. So they break down the 4 quadrants into your customer, your technology, your competition, your resources and capabilities, and then how you think that relates to your value creation hypothesis, and how you think that creates your value capture hypothesis. So in the document we give you, they walk through some case examples of other companies and how they might have filled this out to give you an idea. But it helps you kind of walk through again, thinking about which quadrant you're in, and then beginning to put this background together that can support your story. All right, next slide. The other thing we want you to do is to start pulling together your competitive matrix. So this follows up on Ben's presentation from workshop 2 of how do you think about a matrix. The 2 examples I'm going to show you are sourced from the Stanford Biodesign course, but thinking about how do you create a benefit risk assessment, and how do you map out your competitive gap analysis. And the goal will be to discuss that with your client director. So next slide. So this is the example of the benefit risk assessment. And in this case, it's applied toward atrial fibrillation. And it says, what are the treatment categories you might select? So rhythm control, rate control, thromboembolic, embolic risk. And then what are the treatment options? Or it could be brands that you put in here in terms of what you would do, and then kind of mapping out the benefits and risks of each one. Next slide. And then taking that a step further to get to kind of the competitive gap analysis. So when you're looking at your area of use, in this case, atrial fib, what the treatment options bring, and then how strong are they in each of the things that kind of matter to the customers that you ultimately want to sell to. In this case, your pluses are your positive effects and your minuses are your negative, and a blank square means it's just a neutral effect. So we want you to pull together something like this in terms of competitive matrix in the areas that you are competing. Next slide. Oh, that's my last slide. So those are the 2 assignments we'll kind of add to the list. Both of them, as you could tell, increase in their importance. Your most pitch decks will have a competitive matrix included, and so this begins to source out the bottom of that. And we'll get those assignments to you with the frameworks, and we do have the online link will take you to a version. I'm trying to channel my inner Doug, because he's been doing really good at building the online documents to input this data. And so we've done that, and hopefully you'll be able to use that. Any questions or comments? All right, I'm not seeing anything in the chat, and I'm not seeing anything, any hands raised. So I think that's it for today. Thanks everybody for joining, and we'll be getting out the recordings and the background slides as soon as we get all of those kind of delivered to us. So have a great rest of your day.